Welcome to the WPAOG Podcast. Today's guest is retired Lieutenant Colonel Pete Selleck, a 2025 Distinguished Graduate Award recipient whose career spans extraordinary service in the military, corporate, and nonprofit sectors. A West Point graduate of 1977 and Army engineer, Pete led troops in the 4th Infantry Division before transitioning to the U.S. Army Reserve. He then spent 35 years at Michelin, ultimately serving as chairman and president of Michelin North America, where his leadership helped support combat operations by fielding life-saving equipment. Beyond the boardroom, Pete has been a steadfast supporter of West Point, dedicating decades to admissions, alumni leadership, and mentorship. In every role, he's modeled what it means to live a life of duty, honor, country. Please enjoy this episode with our host, Jamie Enos.
Pete, thanks so much for coming on the show today. We are so excited to have you on the WPAOG Podcast. Congratulations, 2025 Distinguished Graduate Awardee, recipient. What a great class of awardees, great group. Congratulations again, and thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Jamie. It's good to be here.
Yeah, well, let's just jump into it right away. How did you even end up at West Point?
Well, I'm one of those that is a long descendant of West Point graduates. My grandfather, whose name was Charlie Daly, he is the guy for whom Daly Field is named. He was class of 1905. Both of my grandfathers are graduates. One went to the Air Force, and my namesake, Clyde A. Selleck, was the president of the class of 1910. And then my father was in class of 52, along with my father-in-law. And then I have great uncles and cousins, and even our son has gone to West Point. So it's sort of our family school.
Yeah. So when you're here as a cadet, does anybody else know that Daly Field's named after your family?
You know, it's interesting. I didn't tell anybody, and now my classmates are discovering it as I get a little bit beyond graduation. But obviously, you don't talk about those sort of things. You're just trying to blend in and be like everyone else.
Yeah, I was just curious, like if you'd get any, little extra hazing for that, like poking fun of you or anything. Which is, it's obviously a great accomplishment and what an honor. But at the same time, when you're a cadet, right, you're always trying to not be the first person in line and not be the last person in line, right? You want to be right in the middle, I guess.
Well, one of the bits of advice my dad gave me when I came to West Point was to keep a low profile, not to stand out. And as we were going through the DGA ceremony, I was thinking maybe I'm not doing such a good job at that today, but nevertheless, it's a great honor to be a West Pointer, and just to be part of this family tradition is amazing.
Right. Yeah. So when you're here as a cadet, were you a troublemaker, or were you one of those cadets that was always the straight A student and always, behaving and no demerits, no hours?
Well, I think, first of all, I did walk the area. I did walk. I accrued 1 hour walking the area. It was not fair, but that was just the way it was. I had to do that when I was a cow. But no, other than that, I think most of my classmates would say I was a pretty straight up cadet. I did pretty well academically. I was the commander of 1st Regiment as a first classman. And so West Point to me it actually played very well to my strengths. And I was here at a very interesting time.
What memories stand out the most when you were a cadet?
Well, like everyone, I think our day, you kind of,
Sure.
you get ready for this, and then suddenly you get hit by the truck on our day, and you go from being basically a child to an adult in one day. And it was an awesome day. And I remember, laying in my bed that night thinking, what have I done? What have I done to myself? But again, my dad just said, do your best and keep your sense of humor. And we all got through it together. It was a journey where you really do learn that you have to learn to depend on your classmates, and your classmates become your best friends for life.
Yeah, your classmates, you're very close with them, right? Even today, and you do that all the time. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how do you keep that bond with them?
Well, I'm the vice president of our class, so that really helps. I do that because I know how important these connections are. I think when you graduate and you start your professional life, you put a lot of energy into your family and into your career. And I think you don't put as much time, particularly guys don't put as much time into relationships, but particularly as we got into our 60s and now into our 70s, I saw certainly with my father-in-law's class, how important those relationships really become. So it really is, it's incredible to watch our class come back together after all these years. Our companies have regular Zoom calls. Just for example, for this DGA event, 10% of our class was there. 10% came to just be together. And I think these are the friendships where, very few college groups go through a similar experience when you're early in your adult life, and then everyone goes out and serves the nation. There's just such a commonality of experience and deep respect for each other. It's just a wonderful thing.
All right, Pete. So, obviously leading soldiers, and then you were steering big time global business operations. How do you think West Point prepared you for that? Like multiple challenges in those environments at Michelin. How do you think that set you up? Because we know that the structure and the rigor that gets you there, but it's so much more than that, right? So how did that help you prepare for those environments?
Well, it really is. And I almost went to the Air Force Academy. My maternal grandfather, who was in class of 33, went into the Air Force, and he retired. They retired in Colorado Springs. Mm-hmm. And as a child, we would visit them. I fell in love with Colorado. I wanted to fly. I wanted to serve my nation. The logical place is to go to the Air Force Academy. And frankly, I was living in Carlisle, Pennsylvania at the time. My dad was on the staff of the War College. And the Air Force officers were actively recruiting me, whereas the West Point officers were not. There was really no West Point recruiting process going on, but the Air Force people were. And so I almost went to the Air Force Academy. But in the end, what really flipped it for me was the concept of leadership. I knew that West Point was different. I knew that West Point really put an emphasis on leading people. And that turned out to be exactly right. And the leadership experience as a cadet, the things that you do as a young officer, as a platoon leader, as a company commander, those things are unparalleled. The type of responsibility you get as a 20-year-old is just amazing. And that just played out big time as I went into my Michelin career, that it was just, you become a very natural leader because you do it. You can't learn leadership in a book. You have to actually do it. You've got to make mistakes. You've got to see successes. You've got to watch other people. And that really played a huge role in my subsequent life after the Army. But I will say that being a company commander in the Army was probably the most challenging leadership job that I ever had. It was big responsibility. We were not in a combat situation at the time, but certainly we prepared as if we were going to go. So it's a very serious responsibility, and you're very young. And subsequently, I had a lot of. In effect, I was in command positions at Michelin for over 30 years, but nothing compared to the development and the challenge that I had as a company commander.
And so what advice did you have for like younger leaders than when you were at Michelin? Because having gone through that, right, and being mentored by lieutenant colonels or colonels, and then now you're in that reverse role of mentoring. What did you advise them?
Well, we talked to a lot of leaders when they were just going into leadership positions at Michelin. And one of the things that, you really emphasize is that when you're a leader in an organization, you're not the leader because you're better than everyone else. You're the leader because you have certain skills that can help other people be successful. And it's very, very important to recognize the contribution and the important role that each person plays in the role, and to talk to people about trying to really get them to understand how they fit into something that's much bigger than what they are, as opposed to simply recognizing that they're doing a specific job. The parallel is a story of in the medieval times when the guy came out to a construction site and he asked one guy, he said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm taking big rocks and I'm making them into square blocks. And then the other guy, person doing the same job, was asked, what are you doing? And his response was, well, I'm helping to build a beautiful cathedral. And you want people to understand the larger purpose of what they're doing. And that certainly was something that I learned as I went through my leadership journey.
Yeah, that bigger picture. It's hard to communicate that sometimes though, right? It's like that's sometimes the bumps that we hit in the road of like how to communicate that. Do you have any like feedback or tips for people of like how to get that messaging across, right? Because sometimes that gets lost when you're trying to get that.
Well, you're right. It's hard, but it's something that you can do. When you're, for example, when you're a company commander, you understand where the battalion is going. You understand the larger mission, and it's important to be able to sit down with your subordinate leaders and even all the people in the organization and try to explain to them, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What we're going to do something tomorrow, but what's the larger view of what we're trying to do right now? And anytime you can do that and help people put the work that they're doing into perspective, that makes their work much more meaningful, and it certainly helps them feel better about what they're doing, particularly if it's difficult.
Yeah. You've grown up, the whole family servant leader. I feel like the whole family has that, right? Like you mentioned, you're coming from a long line of West Point grads, military service. It's in your blood. It's ingrained in your lifestyle. You how do you define service to the nation? It's something that you haven't given up since you've left the military, right? You're still doing that and giving back to West Point. How do you define that service to the nation, and how do you think that's even evolved over the course of your life?
Well, I think when you go to West Point, or you go into the military, you're going into the service, and that word service is just so important. And I think it goes to trying to understand this country and what this country really means. We talk about duty, honor, country. Well, this is a very unique country in the world, in the history of the world. I've been fortunate to live outside of the country for about 12 years of my life, so I've seen, and I've had operations all over the world, so I've seen what the rest of the world looks like. And this country is extremely unique. Everybody, there's a level of opportunity that exists for almost anybody here, if you look and work hard for it, that does not exist in most other countries in the world. We certainly are not perfect. We have things that we need to improve. But it was amazing to me the number of people that came to me during my Michelin career when I was in other countries, and basically took me to the side and they said, what can I do to get an assignment in the United States so that my children can possibly at some point be educated there and perhaps even become U.S. citizens, because I know that my children will have more opportunity and be able to do more things if they're Americans than if they're any other nationality. And that really had an impact on me to understand that we as Americans sometimes don't really appreciate everything that this country does for us. So I think, going back to your question, the concept of serving that country, both in the military on active duty, in the reserve subsequently, that was important to me, that when I left active duty that I continue to do what I can do. And even today, we've just started recruiting the West Point class of 2030, and I have a Zoom call with my Southeast admissions officer here right after we finish taking care of this podcast, and we're starting to work on the new class, and that gives you a great sense of satisfaction that you're continuing to do something to help the country advance.
Yeah, we talk about that 50-year affiliate program, right? And like we talk about legacy, and that kind of goes into my next question of like, what do you think, that legacy program, right? Like you have that corporate, history that you've had, and now even the West Point connection and the DGA and the kind of the responsibility that comes along with that, standing out on that field and your classmates looking up to you and leading your class still to this day. What do you think that legacy looks like?
Well, the 50-year affiliation program is wonderful. It's only been going for I guess about 20 years now. But wow, the one thing I've gotten out of it is that most of my classmates graduated from West Point. They've come back for maybe a couple of reunions and maybe a football game here and there, but really they've not had much contact with West Point since they graduated. I've been very fortunate because I've been involved in recruiting, and I've been on the AOG board and I'm a class officer. So I've been doing a lot of things where I've been connected and I've been seeing cadets every year. But most of my classmates have not. And the affiliation program, by having classmates here at our day, having classmates do the march back from Lake Frederick, we're about to have a large number of classmates assist the class of 2027 as they take their affirmation in August. That's a very exciting moment. We also will be involved in branch night. We have other things that are happening, but it really has allowed more and more of our classmates to come back and really see cadets and see what cadets are today and see that they are just as motivated, just as dedicated. They're all overachievers like we were, and they really want to serve our country. And it really puts into perspective that this place is still achieving its mission of preparing young men and young women to be leaders of character to serve our nation. So it's a great program, and I'm very appreciative that West Point AOG supports it the way it does.
Yeah, I love when that comes up, and I always like to tell a story, whether this makes podcast or not, and Bill cuts it, but that's fine. But I always like to tell a story when we're out, especially during the ring melt ceremony, and the cadets usually connect with that moment, and they start to hear the stories of who's like donating the rings and the West Pointers behind the rings. And I feel like that's like a real moment where cadets start to understand who has come before them, right? I mean, they know the bigger names. They know the names of the bugle notes, cadets that have already, made those big name histories. But now they start to know like the person, and they meet them, and those one-on-one connections, and that connection is just so invaluable. And we see that, and then in turn, they start to say like, oh, I can't wait to be the 50-year affiliate. I can't wait to come back and do this to and it's like they start doing the math, and it's like, oh my gosh, right? And then we start thinking about the power of that program, and it does it really kind of like, oh, okay, great, this is so wonderful, chokes you up and kind of really makes you understand how valuable and powerful.
Can I tell a quick story about that ring melt? This past January, my cousin Mary Maroney donated my great uncle Peter Pekka's ring to the ring melt class of 1934. My uncle Peter was a career Army officer. He was a colonel during the Second World War and did great things. But when I was getting out of the Army, when I left active duty in 1982, that's kind of a difficult moment, because obviously I had assumed I was going to stay in the Army for at least a full 20-year career. And Uncle Peter did two things for me. First of all, he told me, you can continue to serve. You need to think about being a reserve officer in case the country does need you. And I did. I stayed in the reserves for another 21 years. And the other thing he said was you need to think about getting involved in West Point admissions. He'd been involved in admissions for many years, and he set me on a path that had a huge impact on my life. So knowing that my Uncle Peter's ring is now part of the ring melt, that there's a molecule, an atom of his ring that will be in every subsequent ring. It's just an amazing program, and I love my Uncle Peter, and I appreciate the impact he had on my life.
Yeah, that legacy gold that will now be passed on forever, right? And that's kind of a real important thing that we now take on with that program. So we do. That's very valuable, not only in worth and value, but also just in history that we take it's very important to us here at AOJ. So when we talk about that, you have the family legacy, of course. Do you have some mentors who have had that lasting impression and that influence on your journey, either military or corporate, throughout those? And like you said, you active duty, reserve, and your corporate career. It's just so impressive. Who's been those influencers that have helped you and supported you?
Well, there are many. There are almost too numerous to name. It starts with my father and my father-in-law, and certainly the other West Point graduates in my family. But on active duty, probably the most significant person that impacted me was my senior raider when I was a company commander for 2 years in the 4th Infantry Division. It was a young one-star general by the name of Colin Powell. He was he was somebody that I got to know and actually maintained a relationship with him for the rest of his life. But he was amazing. And one of the things that really I subsequently learned about him that even impressed me more was that he had some difficulties as assistant division commander of the 4th ID. He kind of got sideways with the division commander. He wrote about this in his autobiography, and he thought his career had ended as a one-star general after the first year. And I was still working with him during the second year in his tenure there. And yet you never would have known that. You never would have known that he was having difficulty. He helped me understand that as a leader, it doesn't matter how you're being treated or how things are going on above you. What counts is to treat your people and lead them effectively. And I saw that with him, and I use that experience to explain to people that, you can't say, well, I'll be a good leader if I'm well led. You've got to be a good leader regardless of what happens. But getting to know people like that, and there's so many extraordinary people leading in the United States Army. The United States Army is privileged that it is a first-class institution as opposed to the militaries in other countries. A lot of other countries, if an interesting situation came up when our son was serving in Afghanistan and Iraq, we were living in France at the time, and a lot of our French friends kind of came up to us and said, "We're really, really sorry that your son is in that situation, that he ended up having to be in the military, and now he has to do that." And that's not the way Americans look at military service. And so I really appreciate the fact that we have so many wonderful people that are willing to dedicate, whether it's 5, 20, 30, or 40 years of their lives to serving our country and making all the sacrifices that you have to make in order to do that.
Yeah, it's certainly been a lot of sacrifice. So how did you balance your work and life? Being such a leader at such a high level, how did you balance that work life?
That's a common question, particularly in my career. A lot of people would at Michelin would come up and ask that question, because as you take on more and more responsibility, your career can actually become never ending. It can become, the demands can become such that, you simply devote so much time to your work that you forget about everything else. But, in the end, it's a lot about time management. And you certainly begin to learn that even as a cadet, even as a new cadet.
Yeah. Our day, right? It starts on day one.
When more is coming at you than what you can actually do, then you have to learn to prioritize. You have to learn to delegate. You have to learn to decide what you're not going to do in order to get the most critical things done. And then probably most importantly, and this is certainly a lesson you learn in Beast Barracks, you learn, okay, as soon as you get caught not doing one of those unimportant things and someone calls you on it, you say, "No excuse, sir," or "No excuse, ma'am." You just accept unconditional responsibility. And that is the ability to accept unconditional responsibility for a situation as a leader it's a wonderful skill to have. It's a wonderful blessing to have, because if you can, instead of trying to blame people or make excuses constantly, you simply say, "Okay, that didn't get done. I'm responsible. I take that. So let's now move on." And particularly as a leader, when you get into difficult situations where something has gone wrong and you have to get it fixed, as a leader, if you can take responsibility for that reduces the energy that your subordinates have to use to point fingers at each other to say, "No, this isn't my fault." And okay, you've taken responsibility, and then you can say, "Now help me as a leader solve this problem," and you can really get people more focused and get more energy into getting the situation improved.
Sometimes we find at AOG that West Pointers have difficulty asking for help, though, right? And so we've created some programs to support West Pointers, like our Veteran Services program, to let them know that, we are here to support them and help them when they need that scaffolding. How do you think that maybe we should message that differently or better, because that can be a hard thing, asking for help. Do you have any advice for that, of how to ask for help?
I think that's a really, really excellent skill that people have to learn to be successful leaders. Certainly I ran into situations at West Point. I ran into situations in the Army. I ran into situations at Michelin where I got overwhelmed, and I probably was too slow in asking for help. But when I did, it made a huge difference. An example, if I could give one, would be I was a plant manager at Michelin when I was 35 years old. I had a 2,000 person plant making car tires, and about 2 years later, I became the head of all of the plants. There were 8 Michelin plants in North America. So I was the youngest plant manager. Now I'm in charge of everyone, and we had to go through a major restructuring because we had just made an acquisition and we financially were in great difficulty. So a lot of pressure. My hair was jet black at that point, and my hair turned gray very quickly. But I remember, I remember I lost weight. I wasn't sleeping well, And, we got everything moving in the right direction. And finally I went into my boss. And said, I think we're going to be okay, but I think you may have chosen the wrong person for this job. I may not have been the right person. And he said, well, why do you say that? And I said, well, when I was a plant manager, I would go into meetings, we'd have problems, but I could always walk out of the meeting feeling like I understood what the situation was and what we were going to do about it. But I said, now I go into meetings and oftentimes I'll walk out of the meeting and I won't really understand what just happened in that meeting. I really haven't grasped the nut of the issue. And he said, well, how often does that happen to you? And I said, well, it happens about 1 out of every 3 meetings for me. And he looked at me and smiled. He said, well, for me, it happens about 1 out of every 4 meetings. And I said, really? I said, well, I was in a meeting with you last week, which was one of my meetings where I didn't understand it. And we talked about what the subject was. He said, well, that was one of my meetings too. I said, really? I said, well, you didn't react in any way. He said, well, and he sort of explained to me what he does when he got into that situation. But first of all, that helped me understand that, I was at a level of responsibility where it wasn't that uncommon for that to happen. And then secondly, and probably more importantly, I demonstrated to him that I was vulnerable, that I was willing to admit to him that I couldn't do something. And our relationship completely changed from that point forward. And the trust that helped build between the two of us was really remarkable and really led to us being very successful in succeeding in that restructuring effort. So, but to me, to go to ask for help, I thought I was failing. And I saw subsequently in my career that I saw subordinates come to me almost in tears when they finally broke down and asked for help. And I would sort of say, well, maybe I failed you because I haven't told you that that's the normal part of my job. My job is to help you do that. So I think, the mental health aspect of the pressures that go into your professional life and the ability to ask people for help is a crucial skill to develop, particularly for, as I mentioned earlier, overachievers, people that have type A personalities and see asking for help as some sort of sign of failure, which it is not.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a sign of growth, right? And that's what we're here for too, to help each other. And like you said at the beginning, right? It's like that's the whole premise of West Point, and relying on your buddy, your partner next door to get you through, and you can't do it alone. We hear that theme all throughout. I mean, I haven't done an interview yet where it's like I did it by myself. It's never alone. Someone's always naming someone else, and they always say, "I know I forgot someone else too," because the list is incredibly long. Even as you mentioned earlier, it's never one person. So. Absolutely. I wanted to go back though on your work with admissions. Can you just talk a little bit about that and what you do and how you support the academy in that way?
Certainly. When I was a reservist, I drilled as a reservist for a while, and then that became too much with my family and my professional life. But I found this position as a military academy liaison officer, better known as a MALO. And I did that. I think I did that for 19 years. And then Nancy and I went to France for a 8.5 year deployment over there. And then when we came back, I became a volunteer at that point. And today I'm the state coordinator for the state of South Carolina. But basically what we do is we support the admissions department in, when we identify, for example, South Carolina right now, we have 182 candidates that have started files for the class of 2030. And our admissions officer last week gave us the top 5 candidates in each of the 7 congressional districts. So we're currently making contact with them. Some of the candidates are well advanced in their application. Others have done nothing other than start their file. So we're out there working with them now as they go through the process, letting them know when the congressional nomination deadlines are, because that's really the first deadline that comes up. We will interview candidates as part of the process when appropriate to do so. The interview is part of the admissions process, and a candidate cannot get into West Point without an interview from a member of the field force. So that's another thing that we do. And then finally, what we also need to do is we work on an increasing awareness of both high school students, but also of high school counselors. It's kind of amazing still how many young people are not aware of the opportunity that West Point, Army ROTC, other service academies, They're not aware of those opportunities, and they're wonderful opportunities in terms of the financial aspect of it, in terms of the fact that you go to college knowing exactly what you're going to do when you graduate, and that there will be a job waiting for you when you graduate. These are all amazing things. And then also the fact that you get to serve your country. And whether you serve on active duty for 5 or 30 years, it really doesn't matter. You're going off on a path which is pretty powerful. So that's what we do. And I have a network of graduates and parents that are assisting us at each congressional district who are they feel passionate about doing this and trying to help these young people, not to convince them to go to West Point, but to support them in their college admissions process, to make sure they get all the information they possibly can, so that hopefully by next spring, they've gotten into a number of these different colleges and programs, and they can make the best informed decision based on what they personally want to have done. And obviously the more we support them, the better. The fact that the Air Force Academy officers at Carlisle supported me, that really pushed me towards the Air Force Academy.
Right.
That doesn't, they didn't try to convince me to go, but that also helped me understand that it is important that we represent West Point well, and that even if this candidate decides to go to the Naval Academy or somewhere else, at least they'll look back and say, yeah, but West Point treated me well, and they really are focused on people, and in some cases they will apologize to you, say, oh, I'm sorry, but I've decided to go somewhere else. Tell them, no, you this is your decision. Don't worry about us. This is not about us. It's about you.
Right. That connection that you've built, and you've mentored these young people through that process, and it's become so valuable to them. That's a great mentorship there. That's
exactly. You basically try to be a trusted advisor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a wonderful position, those MALOs and the Academy, very resourceful, and what a great compliment to the application process. So we appreciate your support through that. So my last question is always, talking to cadets and the future of the Long Gray Line, right? What advice do you have for those young people graduating as they enter their young military careers or their young corporate careers as they just start out? What would you advise them and how they get started?
Well, I think first, I know everyone leaving West Point wants to be successful. That's
right.
And they want to achieve their full potential, whatever that's going to be. But I tell people that in relation to success and also in relation to work-life balance, I think it's really important to understand priorities in your life. And, I guess my journey has taught me that there really are 4 distinct priorities that you need to think about. The first is your purpose. You need to understand what the purpose of your life is. And that can be religious, that can be spiritual, that can be philosophical, but you need to define that purpose and think consciously about, okay, why am I here? And in the end, think about what you want people to say about you at the end of your life. Now, everyone's going to have a funeral. Everyone's going to have people stand up and talk about them. What is it that you want people to say about you? And that can allow you to back into understanding what your purpose is. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the concept of service to other people, service to your community, service to your country, that's a natural element of purpose for most people that go into the military journey and certainly go to West Point. So for me, service has been a huge part of my purpose. So that's the first priority. Understand what your purpose is. Your second priority needs to be your health, your health in all of its different components, your health, your medical health, your physical health. We talked a little bit about your mental health, your financial health. You've got to develop, you've got to grow, and you've got to take care of yourself. You really can't help other people unless you yourself are in good shape. So don't ever, I know I found times in my career where I was sacrificing some elements of my health. I wasn't working out as much because I got too involved in my work. And I had to go back and sort of recenter and say, okay, you have to take care of yourself. So that's your second priority, is your health. The third priority is your family and your friends, your relationships. Those are crucial. They're also part of your mental health. Your relationships are certainly crucial to your life. And then your fourth priority is your career. And I'm not saying in any way that you shouldn't work hard, but you've got to keep that in perspective with everything else. And I would have people at Michelin say, well, how can you say that? How can you tell people that your work at Michelin is not the most important thing in your life? And the answer was simple. The answer was, well, I know successful people throughout our company at all levels. And those successful people have already figured out what I just said. They've already figured out that purpose, health, family and friends, and then career, that's the thing you need to work on. And you also have to understand that success is not a destination. Success is what you're doing right now. And I would say that most cadets are probably pretty successful people. Most young officers, junior officers, platoon leaders, company commanders are successful people. And obviously they're still on their journey to achieve more and more responsibility and find out what their full potential really is. But don't think that there's a magic thing that you wake up one day and say, okay, now I'm successful. That's not the way it works. Your success is an attitude. It's an approach to life. And when you go out in the Army as a second lieutenant, the members of your platoon will look at you and you will be one of the most successful people that they will ever know in their lives. So understand that and certainly recognize that that's the way people look at you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I appreciate that because it's like the right now versus the long term, right? Like you can still have those goals and you can still be looking for that future, but to be living in that moment, especially when we're in this fast-paced environment with social media or the need now and all of that, but knowing that this is happening right now and this in this moment is the most important while you're still working towards that long term, but to be fixated on what's happening around you in the moment and the people that are there with you is really a powerful way to kind of live that moment and that life. But that's a really powerful way to kind of conclude that. So, well, Pete, thank you so much for being on today. Really appreciate it. Very inspiring. You have a great story to tell. So much more to hear about from the Center of Oral History. Check out more from your interview there. People can hear a lot more about that. Congratulations again on your 2025 DGA award. And we always see you around West Point. So we will be seeing more of you there and appreciate all your work with doing all the admissions work as well. So thanks for being on, Pete.
Thanks, Jamie, and good luck to you.
Thank you for listening to the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and subscribe to automatically get updates on a new episode. Thank you for listening.